Good morning, half of the morning to you. My name is Roy Osherove, and this is just distracting for now. Okay. So, actually, I really like that talk because it emphasizes a lot of the crap and the reimagining of different concepts in Agile to sell new things, which is exactly why I have a new thing to sell to you today. It's called Integrity Driven Development. So thanks for that. Actually, Integrity Driven Development is not something new. It's just a different way of thinking about the same things. And I want to start with these two amazing words, enterprise and legacy. They mean such good things in the English language, and yet in software, they mean such bad things. Such an enterprising young man. This is an enterprise software. Crap. I leave you my legacy. I leave you my legacy. Crap. Why is that? Why can't we control these things? We are all going to these conferences. We're going to learn so many new things in this conference. But let's be honest, most of the things you're going to learn in this conference will not make a difference in your organization. You're going to go into your organization, and you're going to start seeing these things. Yes, everyone, let's do this. And everyone agrees, yes, we should do this. And then nothing happens. Or you finish a meeting, and everyone agrees what should be done, and then the meeting is over, and nothing gets done, and then the next week the same meeting happens again and again. It's like a time travel. Or you know what you have to do, but everybody around you seems to be clueless, and the more you explain, the less people listen. Something is missing, and this is what this talk is going to be about. And the last talk mentioned the idea that most teams are not self-organizing, and they need to be coached. And what we're going to talk about is that glue that connects what we have in our head to actually making it happen in reality. So integrity can be defined in many different ways. I'm going to choose just one of these because whenever I talk about teams, that's what I mean. Integrity can be defined as the ability to meet the requirements or the demands of reality. If you think about it, if you've ever seen any kind of Star Trek episode, hull integrity is at 96%, right? That integrity is the ability to withstand specific pressures, to basically withstand reality. Most teams that, as we know them, don't really know how to withstand reality. Now, we know how to get code to withstand reality, or at least we know what we should do, but we also don't do a lot of that. Let's talk about integrity of code, the ability of the code to meet the demands of reality. Code has several realities, actually. When you write the code, the compiler tells you whether it meets the reality of compiling, right? Imagine if you could only code and compile, like if you could only compile once every 2 weeks. Life would be hell, right? Early computers were like that, but imagine that, writing code blindly, and only every 2 weeks you know how it faces up to reality. And then you get another 2 weeks to fix all the stuff that you went through that same day. And fortunately, we have continuous compilation. Right? You save something, you immediately know whether it meets the demands of reality or not, at least on your machine. But then we have functional reality. You write tests to make sure that it not only compiles, but it actually does what it's supposed to do. So imagine that you could only run tests every couple of weeks. Well, some of you probably don't have to imagine that, unfortunately. But those of you who are lucky enough to only need to imagine that have continuous testing, know that continuous testing is as important as continuous compilation, because we know that it meets the demands of reality as we said it before. And there's a third level, the customer's reality. Works on my machine, runs the tests on my machine or on the build server, but does it actually work on the production servers? Does it meet the requirements of reality of the production? All the security stuff? Does the customers look at the application and actually say, okay, that's not what I wanted, or that's what I exactly wanted? How soon does it take for the customer's reality and the code's reality to clash with each other? Now, we want that to be as soon as possible, to get that feedback as soon as possible, to get continuous deployment so that we can get that feedback just as easy as we can get it from compilation. So we want to continuously check the integrity of our code. And that sums up a lot of the agile coding practices. You want continuous testing, continuous deployment, and all that stuff. And all that stuff talks about code integrity. And that's the stuff that we know in our head that is the right thing to do. And somehow, maybe 10% of it gets done in real life. Because the team might need the ability to face reality as well. And most teams don't have that ability. Most teams are not what a lot of agile proponents would say, self-organizing. And I love it, again, how that, I heard it in many methodologies. You lock the team in a room for 2 weeks. You lock the room. You come back after 2 weeks, you get something back, a potential incremental shippable product. Now, most teams, if you lock them in a room for 2 weeks, and after 2 weeks you come back, you're going to find a bunch of dead bodies. They're just like, we don't know how to do that. How do we eat? We don't know how to take care of ourselves in this small environment. Most teams, if you leave them alone, they do not have the skills. It's like taking a cub, a lion cub from the zoo, and releasing them into the wild, saying, go free, my child. And like a hawk grabs him and catches him and flies with him in the air. That's what happens to most teams. So they get one of those new Scrum Masters. And the Scrum Master goes to the team and say, team, accept me, I'm your Scrum Master. I will release you into the wild. And the team goes, well, what do we do now? Well, user story, did you say? Or, wait, but they're actually telling us there's no time, and no, you go and self-organize. Figure it out. Figure it out, my teams. And the teams figure it out. They figure it out that this is crap. They go back to what they're used to doing. Okay, this guy has no idea. Let's just. I actually had a Scrum Master tell me once, look, I was trying to convince them to do the right thing, but I had no authority. So they self-organized and they chose not to use source control. True story, true story. And he's like, I told them. And I explained to them, and they said, we're self-organizing, this is the right thing, we know what you're doing. And of course, that project lost some of its source code, had a lot of problems. But that tells you a lot about what does it actually mean. Does the team actually have skill to deal with what they need to do? Do they know how to write quality code under pressure? Do they know how to deal with customers that keep having demands? Now, you might say the Scrum Master is supposed to solve all that, or the team leader is supposed to solve all that. But then if the team leader is supposed to solve all that, if one person is supposed to solve all that, how is that a self-organizing team again? A self-organizing team is a team that's supposed to know how to solve its own problems without having a bottleneck of a single person that solves its problems. I'm a self-organizing team. Ooh, someone's coming to me with requests. Please, you handle him. That one person needs to handle that person. So that's not a self-organizing team, because 1 week, Scrum Master is sick, that team is stuck. They're stuck in well, you're going to find a bunch of dead bodies again. So most teams are not really self-organizing. What are most teams? Most teams that I see are longing to have some time to do the right thing. They long for that time where someone actually understands them and lets them do what it is that they do best. Write code that they can be proud of and make it work. But they have no skills how to get anyone to give that to them. They don't know how to ask. Most teams are in what I call survival mode. Most teams are overcommitted to things. That means that they might be already late in delivering things that they promised, or they're just chasing fires. They have a long periods of either stress. They don't have context of what it is they're actually supposed to deliver. They might not even be delivering for a long time. Most teams don't have time for all that unit testing and TDD stuff. Imagine that you're sending people, and I'm sure this never happened to you. You send people on 3 days course of learning TDD with Roy Osherove, and then they come back and say, yes, I know all that stuff, and then nothing happens. Nothing changes. They have the skill of how to write the code, but they have no skill of how to actually integrate that new practice. They don't have time to integrate it. And that's where survival mode, that's what I define as survival mode. That time, or that phase, where you don't have time to do all that learning, all that slow practice. So early warning signs that you're in survival mode might be that you're unable to deliver, or that you're in a long period of stress, or that you have people who make decisions that are central to decision making. The team cannot really make a decision without a specific person on hand, or the team requires a specific person to be on deck for specific causes. The team is always making shortcuts instead of fixing the root causes. If you find yourself just making shortcuts all the time, knowing it's the wrong thing, accruing technical debt, and never having time to fix that technical debt, or avoid it altogether, you might be in survival mode. And one of the main reasons for survival mode is that the team, again, doesn't have the skills. So there are people who do have the skills, and those are the people the team relies on. Those are the bottlenecks, or the bus factors. A bus factor, for those who don't know, is the amount of people it takes to get hit by a bus for the team to stop functioning. A bus factor of 1 is the most horrible bus factor. But if you think about it, most of the teams that you know have bus factors, probably more than 1. If there's the one person who knows about the build, you know that 5,000 line XML file that nobody understands, but that guy over there in the corner, like Vladimir on the corner there. And then one day, here's news, Vladimir is going to leave. His XML sucks. And he's tired of this. And then what are you going to do? So I was in a project where that actually happened. We had a person, a consultant, working 7 years on a project, and they knew everything about the build. Everything, all the scripts. And they had this whole universe, like Neo and the Matrix. You could go and say, it is already done. Very complicated stuff. And then he left, because 7 years, come on. And then the project couldn't deliver for 2 months. This is a project with 70 developers. They couldn't deliver for 2 months. They had to rehire the person, pay him triple, just to record him for 2 weeks as he does a release. Takes a week to release a product. And that's a bus factor right there. What do we do about these bus factors? How do we get rid of them? That's one of the things we're going to talk about. Here's another example of a bus factor. In one of the teams I was actually part of, we had a bottleneck, not a bus factor in this case. The team was stuck. We didn't know how to make a decision. For example, we're working on an API for something, and one person said, well, this method is much better, and then another person said, well, this method name is much better because it has less parameters and it's more readable. Another person said, well, but it's very surprising to the person, and you don't want to have an element of surprise in the API. And then another person said, but if you do it this way, then you have this IntelliSense and then Lambda expression, whatever. And half a day we were arguing, and we couldn't get work done. Not because we didn't know how to do it, but we couldn't agree on what to do. That's a bottleneck. A lot of teams don't have the skills of how to make a decision in that situation. And a lot of people will say, well, the solution is one person makes a decision. Or you bring in an architect. You're bringing in someone, and that someone makes a decision. They are the judge, King Solomon. I will split the API in half. Well, some people knew that story. That's good. But here's what really happened. Our leader at the time came into the room, saw what's really going on, and he asked us a simple question. Okay, what are the values that we share, that we have for the API? And we started just writing them on the board. And we came up with several. This is just a small example of some of them. So some people said, well, readable, some said short, some said no surprises, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And we had this list of values, and we all agreed these are good values, we like them. And I said, okay, for each method, write down the list of values on the left and the methods on the top, and score from 1 to 5 how much that method lives up to that value. And we listed this, and by the time we were done with this table, we had already made a decision. Because it was clear that one of the methods was better, it contained more value or more shared values than the rest. And sometimes there are two that are close, but there's always one that is higher. And if it's still a tie between two really good options. So that leader didn't really decide for us. What he did give us is a new skill. He gave us the skill of what to do when we don't know how to choose. And I find myself using that skill over and over. I was in a project and we were trying to do a proof of concept, going with Amazon Web Services and Azure versus going to the private cloud. And we couldn't decide what would be the proof of concept. And one of the things we came up with was 5 different ideas. Like, do we just move all the test stuff or the whole development environment, just the client software, just the server and databases? And when we saw that we couldn't really make a decision, we were 4 architects trying to make this decision, I came up with this list. I said, okay, what are the values? What are the things they're trying to get from this proof of concept? So someone said, well, I want to check the latency. Another person said, I want to check the cost. Another said, I want to check the throughput, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So we had this list of values, and then we mapped this again on the decision matrix. And by the end of this table, we had already made a decision. And it was such a nice discovery that you can do this. That skill serves me all the time. I don't need a person to make decisions because I know how to get the group to make a decision as a group, even when they can't agree. So that's what I mean by having new skills to self-organize, is that when you come across a situation, you know what to do, and you don't need someone to solve it for you. Now, in this case, one of the tactics as someone who's a bottleneck is that I will teach people simple rules on what to do in specific situations. If you come across this, see if a decision matrix helps. And usually people figure that out very, very quickly. So one lesson from this is that if people are bottlenecks, like if you're an expert, if you're an architect, if you're the database person, if you can be a leader in a team. Now, not an appointed leader, but you have that power of leadership because people will ask you questions and they will listen to what you have to say. And so you can use that power to actually teach the team these new skills. You can use your powers instead of evil, you can use them for good. Because what's the evil part? You know, job security, basically. The good part is that you can start challenging people and not solve all their problems for them in your specific area, but work with them and coach them on that specific area that you are an expert on. So if you're a bus factor, one of the main ways you can measure yourself, whether you're successful or not, because nobody ever told us how to measure how well we're doing. So if I'm an architect, how do I measure myself? I basically look at how many questions do I get asked about my topic. And my job is that to make it so that people will have to ask me less questions, so that I won't have to do any work. I want to be the laziest architect in the world. I want it so that I won't be needed in the team. I want to make the people around me architects so they'll think like me when they go and look at a problem. And that way, when I'm sick, they won't be bothered by it. Now, that sounds like an awful thing to do, to make yourself unneeded, but it's actually a very good thing. Because one, you're removing the risk in the project. You're reducing the risk in the project is a very important thing that you should be doing all the time. If there is one person in a project that knows something and that person leaves, that's a huge risk. But the second is that when you grow the team to solve their problems without you, then you essentially make yourself even more needed. It gives you a force multiplier. It's kind of like World of Warcraft where you get more energy, more power. You're leveling up. Instead of being an architect, you're now that person who makes architects. You're now that person in the company that you can put in different teams and make them into more knowledgeable teams about architecture, etc. So you can actually start moving like a butterfly between multiple teams, looking at more things, and you'll actually have more time to do the things you actually love, like learning more maybe about architecture or learning even other different skills, instead of keep having to solve everyone's problems and probably being very bored doing it. But a lot of us really like that feeling of just knowing, being that person. I'm sure that that person in charge of the build who left, he didn't choose to not share information. It was his job, and everyone else around him just chose to continue to work on whatever that it is that they were supposed to do. Everyone is doing what it is that they're supposed to do. That's awesome. But then you get those risks. So instead, we should be more proactive and look at the people around us. And when we see us doing something that we know that we're the only ones, we have to be proactive. Find someone around and say, hey, come sit with me for 5 minutes. I want to show you something cool. If I work on a build something and I work on TeamCity, and then I look on, and I want to change something, I get someone to sit with me. If it's something that I've never done before, that I know that nobody else knows. So at the very least, 2 people know about this. If someone asks me to solve a problem for them in the build, the last thing I would do is to say, okay. The first thing I would do is to say, okay, let's do it together. Sit next to me, and as they sit next to me, I'll say, okay, take the keyboard and mouse, I'll tell you what to do. Usually it's 5 minutes. What if they say, well, actually, I don't have time? Well, usually I'll say, okay, when you have time, we'll sit and we'll do it together. How's that? What if that person says, well, that's not my job? In that case, I can say, well, it's not my job to be the only one here who knows, because then it's actually a very big risk. You have to know how this works so that if I'm not here, you're not stuck waiting for me. And if you are in enterprise software, you know what it's like waiting for people. It's one of the most horrible feelings of just feeling like you are, hopeless. But of course, a lot of you are thinking, well, that's great. Everything you say is true, Roy, but in my team, probably not going to happen. And most of you are probably wrong. Probably. Because most teams, most developers are actually happy to learn new stuff. And you have to realize you're never going to get a perfect team. Great teams are always grown. If you want a great team, you grow the team around you to be that team that you want them to be. If I want people around me to love TDD, I'm going to ask them to do it with me. I'm not going to be the one who just does it alone. I'm going to sit and pair with them. I'm going to explain, but I'm not just going to explain, I'm going to have them do it. And sometimes I might use my authority as a bus factor, as the only one who knows it, to actually sometimes push people into doing it. And they don't have to love it, actually. And that's very important that you have to realize this. Not everybody has to love you when you are actually challenging them to solve their own problems. It's okay that they're not really happy about this. But whenever that happens, a while later, people will usually respect you more, and they will really appreciate the fact that you did it for them because they don't know what it is that they don't know yet. By pushing them into that direction, you learn new things. Now, there's a book by Jerry Weinberg called Managing Teams Congruently. Jerry Weinberg is a very smart person, a very old person as well. He's written more than 50 books, and I recommend that you read at least 20 of them. Figure out the 20 for yourself. But in this book, he said, leadership done right is a tough job. So if you're an expert, you probably also get paid more as an expert. If you're an architect, you get paid more. If you're like a database expert. If you're a COBOL expert, you get paid more, I guarantee it. But a lot of leaders like to take the money and not do all the hard parts. And the hard parts in leadership, in actually doing something, in changing something, is talking to people, challenging people, confronting problems. It's not supposed to be easy. Actually, I would say that if your team is flowing and everything is just great and everyone's just looking at the sky and waiting for things to happen, it's time to do something. It's time to change something. And to understand why, I want to explain how we learn new skills. Now, in another book that same Jerry Weinberg wrote in Becoming a Technical Leader, he really likes the game of pinball. And in the game of pinball, he used to be like a champion. There was like one machine that he really, really likes. So he keeps coming back to that same machine in the same shop, and he masters it, and he's first place, and then he keeps score over the years. So this is a score over the years, rising and rising. And you can say, okay, over time, when you do something long enough, you get better and better, which makes sense. But when he looked at the numbers more closely, he saw that the rise is not linear, it's not steady. There are periods of slow growth, and then there are periods of very, very quick growth, very quick learning. Those happened, the quick learning happened, when he learned something new about the game, when he learned how to play the game differently, when he was thinking about it differently. For example, when more than a single ball, he discovered more than a single ball at the same time in the game gets you double points. So he learned how to play that way, and he got many more points. And every time he learned something new. But the numbers were lying, because it actually looked like this. Before he got better, he actually got worse. And if you think about it, it makes sense. He had to learn this new technique. At the beginning, he was really bad at it. If you ever learn a new programming language, you know that you're much worse before you get much better. So when I started in Visual Basic 5 and I moved to C#, I remember just writing that first hello world, and it was horrible. The first few months in C# were just really, really annoying and frustrating. But it's something that is basically built into learning. Every time you learn something totally new, you're going to have that ravine, that jump into something. And that's the jump that we're aiming to have our teams in doing. When I look at these ravines, it reminds me that this learning happens not only in technical terms, it also happens in life. Right? I look at these and I see my kids. I have 3 boys. And I look at this ravine and I say, okay, this is me and my wife before we had kids, always saying, oh, we never have enough time to do anything we like. We were both working full-time jobs. We never had enough time. And then our first kid was born, and bam, we were bad at life. Like, we did not know how to handle ourselves. We couldn't even make food. We were, like, hungry. People had to bring food to our house. This little baby was sucking the life out of us. Like, bring food. People had to ship food to our house, like our parents, like, here is a cake, honey. Thank you. We had to learn how to sleep, or not sleep. We had to learn to sleep in shifts. And for a while, it was really difficult for, let's say, 6 months. And after a while, it became easier, and we were there on the second plateau. And we looked back at the time before we had kids, and we said, how come how did we ever say we never had time? Because now we were doing everything we used to do with a child, with the same amount of time. So that's a good learning experience. And we were really happy with ourselves. We were looking at people with new babies and laughing, ha, ha, ha. We knew it's so difficult for them, but we don't really know how things end. And bam, we had our second child. And immediately life became worse. We had to learn different skills now. Apparently, children wake each other up at night. You get one sleeping, and then the other one starts crying, and it's like a whole nuclear chain reaction. Also, you can't just have one person stay in the house and the other goes shopping. You're not going to leave me in the house with 2 kids. It's not going to happen. You start learning how to take a child into a grocery store. Oh my God, that's one of the scariest things I've ever done. More than anything. And after about 6 months, things became easier. And we looked back at the time, we only had one child? So easy. It's so easy, 1 child. 2 kids is difficult. And we had our 3rd child born almost 4 years ago. And immediately life became much more interesting. Our skill set has developed, and we were like, okay, another child is not going to make that big of a difference. We already had 2. And what's the worst that could happen? So, funny story. Imagine running into a park with 3 kids. They outnumber you. And those 3 kids decide to run in 3 different directions, into 3 different roads, 3 different cars. They really like cars, apparently, those kids. What do? That's a new skill you have to learn, and you have to learn really, really quickly. So your ability to deal with the demands of reality has changed. Not because your ability has changed, but the reality has changed. So in each one of these plateaus, our abilities were different. We were not ready for the new reality. And that's what we're talking about with the teams as well, is that some teams are really equipped to deal with the current reality, but if the reality ever changed, that team will be hopeless. And some teams are hopeless now, but if the reality changed to something else, they would be totally cool. They would be self-organizing. So we measure self-organization of a team, or the integrity of a team, by their ability to handle the reality around them. And of course, that takes time. If we want to grow our team and we want to challenge them, then our worst problem is time. Because if we want our team to learn skills, we have to get them to practice them slowly. So if I take my child and I want to teach him how to tie his shoelaces, I send him on a 2-day shoelace Scrum Master course, of course, first thing. Then I get him back and I say, okay, because you're new to this, I'm going to give you 20% more to tie your shoelaces. So you're going to be 20% slower than me to tie your shoelaces after 2 days. And what's really going to happen is that my child is going to be way slower, 5 times, 10 times slower in tying his shoelaces for a while, and then he's going to get faster and faster and faster. And that's the time we're talking about for slow practice. If we want our team to learn new skills, we have to give them time to slowly practice. There's a book called Slack, which just talks about time for slow practice. And in that book, one of the figures mentions is 5 or even 10 times more. So if you want your team to learn something, give them that extra time for a couple of months. That means change your estimates as well. You have to change your estimates, otherwise the team will be in survival mode. So survival mode is that time where you don't have time to learn and slowly practice. And when you do make that time to learn and slowly practice, that is the learning mode, when you actually use that time. And in that learning mode, you are much more of a coach. But in survival mode, you can't be expected to be a coach, because nobody has time. When the Titanic is sinking, the captain doesn't call a meeting. They start giving orders. So if your team is in survival mode, what you need to do is to get out of survival mode. And that means to cut loose some of your extra commitments and to start making decisions. Once you're out of survival mode, you can actually change your estimates to include learning time built in. Another thing that we don't do. Change the estimates to include learning time and pairing built in. And then we're in learning mode. And we can be in learning mode for months or even years until the team can handle its own problems. And you'll know it can handle its own problems in one area when they don't come to you for help anymore. That will be one magical day a year from now, maybe. But that magical day can happen, and then what? A day after, a team can actually move back into survival mode. Because the reality keeps changing around us. So this is not just about the skills of the team, this is about reality that keeps changing. So we could be moving between these 3 different states on a daily basis. So we have to figure out what is the state that we're in, and we have to change our behavior to fit that state. For example, for a self-organizing team, I wouldn't do that stand-up meeting where I used to be in a self-organizing team that really knew what they were doing, but we had this team leader who treated us as if we were in survival mode. So he would have a stand-up meeting, he would stand like this and say, okay, what did you do yesterday? And what did you do today? Anything stopping you? Okay, thank you. What did you do yesterday? It's like in military, basically. Now, if you do that to a self-organizing team that knows what they're doing, you're going to have a lot of risk on your hands, basically. You're going to have a bad time, as they say in my favorite program. Because that team will just say, well, this doesn't actually work for me anymore. I'd rather be doing something else. There's a saying that people don't quit their jobs, they quit their managers. And if the manager or the leader doesn't really know what is the current ability of the team to handle the reality, what type of leader do they need, then they can handle them wrong and actually approach them in the wrong way and actually get everything messed up. So in the same way, Scrum Masters who don't have experience that approach a team that's in survival mode and say, self-organize, and the team is like, I have no idea what I'm doing, they will also fail. And a lot of those projects that fail because you bring in new Scrum Masters with no experience, a lot of it fails because they fail to see the reality. And they also don't know how to coach the teams in those new skills because they don't have them themselves. But the idea of a Scrum Master always being that leader, that's a crucial point. That should not happen. Scrum Master should not be a single point of contact. They should make themselves unnecessary. So if I'm a Scrum Master in the team, I see that as a bad thing. If I'm an architect in the team, I see that as a bad thing. By definition, I'm a bottleneck. I shouldn't be the bottleneck. Everyone should be able to figure out their own problems. And with that, I'd like to finish with a little song. Sounds weird, right? But we're supposed to get out of our comfort zone. I have a helper to bring me the chair and the microphone. Okay, thank you, Stuart. And can you connect also the guitar? Apparently they brought a guitar and they said, hey, play it. Oh, God.
this is difficult.
Okay. And Chris. Hi, Chris. This is Chris. He's going to be my assistant today. We don't have time for an audience test audio. Sorry. Okay, Chris, you know what to do? Yeah. First of all, don't touch anything. Okay. But thank you. It's very helpful. Chris used to be in a band. Still in a band? And now he's in a band again. Okay. So Chris is on the keys. I want to finish with a little song to give you a good taste as you start this conference. It's a song based on a true story. Something that actually happened to me. I know you guys can't see me. Just imagine a beautiful person singing. This is from a team I used to work in that were doing everything wrong, and I knew what needed to be done, but I was powerless. I didn't know what to do about it. We kept failing and failing. This is a song I wrote back then, as the project was failing miserably. It's late in the evening, I'm wondering what words to say. It's so hard to breathe here. The customer's face is gray. And then he asks me, is the product alright? And I say yes. We deploy it all tonight. I check in the changes. The code doesn't even compile. I wish I was home now, but instead I just fake a big smile. And when they asked me, is the code alright? I say yes, it seems to compile tonight. I feel horrible because I see the sadness in their eyes when they find out that the product doesn't even have log files. This thing is doomed. It's time to go home now, and I've got an aching head. So I lock my computer and pray that tomorrow I'm dead. And when my wife asks me, do you feel alright? I say yes, let's watch Game of Thrones tonight. But I feel miserable because I'll guess the madness in their talk when they find out that tomorrow I don't plan to come to work and write my CV. Thank you very much, everybody. Have a great conference and go out and get some coffee, will ya? Okay, bye. Integrity is the ability to withstand specific pressures, to basically withstand reality. Most teams that, as we know them, don't really know how to withstand reality. Now, we know how to get code to withstand reality, or at least we know what we should do, but we also don't do a lot of that. Let's talk about integrity of code, the ability of the code to meet the demands of reality. Code has several realities, actually. When you write the code, The compiler tells you whether it meets the reality of compiling, right? Imagine if you could only code and compile, like if you could only compile once every 2 weeks. Life would be hell, right? Early computers were like that, but imagine that, writing code blindly, and only every 2 weeks you know how it faces up to reality. And then you get another 2 weeks to fix all the stuff that you went through that same day. And fortunately, we have what you have to do, but everybody around you seems to be clueless. And the more you explain, the less people listen. Something is missing, and this is what this talk is going to be about. And the last talk mentioned the idea that most teams are not self-organizing, and they need to be coached. And what we're going to talk about is that glue that connects what we have in our head to actually making it happen in reality. So integrity can be defined in many different ways. I'm going to choose just one of these, because whenever I talk about teams, that's what I mean. Integrity can be defined as the ability to meet the requirements or the demands of reality. If you think about it, if you've ever seen any kind of Star Trek episode, hull integrity is at 96%, right? That's such an enterprising young man. This is an enterprise software. Crap. I leave you my legacy. I leave you my legacy. Crap. Why is that? Why can't we control these things? We are all going to these conferences. We're going to learn so many new things in this conference. But let's be honest, most of the things you're going to learn in this conference will not make a difference in your organization. You're going to go into your organization, and you're going to start seeing these things. Yes, everyone, let's do this. And everyone agrees, yes, we should do this. And then nothing happens. Or you finish a meeting, and everyone agrees what should be done, and then the meeting is over, and nothing gets done, and then the next week the same meeting happens again and again. It's like a time travel. Or you know what continuous compilation, right? You save something, you immediately know whether it meets the demands of reality or not, at least on your machine. But then we have functional reality. You write tests to make sure that it not only compiles, but it actually does what it's supposed to do. So imagine that you could only run tests every couple of weeks. Well, some of you probably don't have to imagine that, unfortunately. But those of you who are lucky enough to only need to imagine that have continuous testing, know that continuous testing is as important as continuous compilation, because we know that it meets the demands of reality as we said it before. And there's a third level, the customer's reality. Works on my machine, runs the tests on my machine or on the build server, but does it actually work on the production servers? Does it meet the requirements of reality of the production? All the security stuff? Does the customers look at the application? Good morning, half of the morning to you. My name is Roy Osherove, and this is just distracting for now. Okay. So, actually, I really like that talk because it emphasizes a lot of the crap and the reimagining of different concepts in Agile to sell new things, which is exactly why I have a new thing to sell to you today. It's called Integrity Driven Development. So thanks for that. Actually, Integrity Driven Development is not something new. It's just a different way of thinking about the same things. And I want to start with these two amazing words, enterprise and legacy. They mean such good things in the English language, and yet in software, they mean such bad things.